Hey, everybody, because that is something that is essential for overall health. As Hippocrates said, it all starts in the gut. All disease is really coming in from a relationship to something that's going on in our gut health. And that's why it is very important to discuss this topic. And that is why we are focused here at South Florida Integrative Health Center with gut health. Now, there's what we call the gut brain connection, there's the gut heart connection. Gut and metabolism are connected. We're seeing a connection with gut and thyroid. In other words, it's essential to get your gut health under control. Some of these basic facts are that what is known as leaky gut really has a medical word known as intestinal hyperpermeability, which is that the tight junctions in our intestines that normally are very selective at what they let into the bloodstream, into our lymphatic system, it's all coming in through the gut very selectively, but it becomes more open to letting other things through. Larger foods get through. Those are proteins in food that now can become reactive in the body. Other toxins can get through as well. That is called intestinal hyperpermeability or leaky gut. Now, what causes that? And this is where we're talking about this microbiome, this diversity of gut bacteria, like how the rainforest has so many different species. And if one species becomes extinct, one plant, one tree is extinct, it disturbs the whole ecosystem. But within our gut, we want that diversity of bacteria. But what we're finding out is in the research, there are these what's called keystone species. These bacteria that we see are very beneficial, or on the other side, are associated with, we see in conditions in rheumatoid arthritis, certain conditions, especially autoimmune conditions, that there are higher amounts of certain key bacteria. And this is what we want to make sure that there's not an overgrowth of those, what they are called opportunistic or commensurate bacteria. And those aren't measured on standard stool tests. What they're looking for are more pathological bacteria, the ones that cause diarrhea. And yes, that's important. But again, that's a culture. And quite often, many things are missed on that culture when you're actually looking at it under a microscope. And that's why sometimes in those types of tests, you need 2 or 3 samples. But on the more accurate, what they call the DNA PCR tests, those can look for particular species. As I've mentioned, some are beneficial, some are detrimental. Yes, there's going to be many more that we're missing that we're going to find out in research, and they get added on to these panels. With the DNA PCR stool test, add on a new bacteria. Like recently in the test that we use at the Integrative Center, they just added Akkermansia, very well known now in the research, a beneficial bacteria that is important for protecting the lining of our gut because it increases this beneficial mucus. This other bacteria that's added is fecal bacterium prunacii. And that one there is a butyrate producer that cuts down on inflammation in the gut. These are just 2 additional species amongst a few others that have just recently been added to these tests as we learn more and more about these gut bacteria that are very, very important at either helping our gut heal or control inflammation and create these short chain fatty acids, which are very, very important. But we also want to keep down this overgrowth of gut bacteria that are normally in our gut. That's the whole point. They're normally there, but in very controlled small amounts. When they get overgrown, that's when they can become inflammatory. We see in the research what they call LPS. You can look it up on PubMed or any research. LPS, that's lipopolysaccharides. This is when these bacteria that again are normally in our gut, they don't create any issues. In fact, they can be having some kind of benefit. But when they overgrow, the die-off becomes inflammatory. They produce these lipopolysaccharides that create inflammation and possibly cause that intestinal hyperpermeability hyperpermeability or leaky gut. So this is really what's important, is not to do those stool tests that, number one, are just the culture, which is looking only for pathogens or parasites, which have its place, but not really when we're talking about healing and fixing the gut from a more chronic point of view, from a more holistic point of view. Yes, if there's a pathogen, we want to know if it's there. Usually they're causing diarrhea and other issues that a person is aware of, but it's these subtle conditions: bloating, constipation, IBD, that's irritable bowel, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease. These are at times caused by these overgrowth of bacteria, amongst other reasons. Now, amongst other causes, what's very important also, and this is what we measure, is to measure the steatocrit, that's how well the body digests fat; elastase, the enzymes, the enzymatic activity in the body. We need enzymes to properly digest protein, fats, and carbohydrates; beta glucuronidase, that's very important for glucuronidation that occurs in the liver, that actually helps to remove toxins, especially these hormones that we need to remove, otherwise they build up and become dangerous. Occult blood, the FIT test, is actually a very good test, not to replace colonoscopies, but in between. That's a very accurate test to see if there's any bleeding in the upper intestines. Secretory IgA is very important. That's the immune system of the gut. Very important to see if it's fatigued or actually overreactive. Anti-gliadin, IgA, that's a protein in gluten that we want to see if it's elevated, is a reaction to eating that protein in gluten. And you can see that from this very accurate PCR stool test. And of course, calprotectin and zonulin is now showing more inflammatory markers, inflammatory conditions that can cause that hyperpermeability or leaky gut. So we're also looking at intestinal health, this category. That's very important. And that's when we're looking at all these other markers. So it's about diversity of bacteria, but also about these keystone species that really promote gut healing. It's about also controlling the overgrowth of certain bacteria that we know don't cause any issues when they're kept under control, but when they overgrow, they can stimulate the immune system to become autoimmune or become inflammatory with those lipopolysaccharides I mentioned earlier. Again, all this comes down to, how do you eat? What about our food? And quite often, when we're talking about enzymes, we're talking about not digesting proteins, or when we're talking about steatocrit, not digesting fats or fat-soluble vitamins. This is crucial when it comes to food. And when we're talking about gliadin, those are all those grains with gluten in it. If you're reacting, then that's important to remove that from the diet. When we're looking at an overgrowth of bacteria, we're looking at properly digesting foods, and that's very, very important to digest foods and not to allow these bacteria to use food as a source to overgrow, like simple carbohydrates, processed foods. At times, certain fruits will allow, if we see there's an overgrowth of bacteria, will allow that bacteria to overgrow. So really, it does come down at the end of the game, at the end of the day, when we're finishing these results of these very advanced stool tests, is how you can change your nutrition, change your diet to really be individualized, personalized to your gut health. And that's when you have really true gut health. Well, I hope you liked the information on this live. Please like it or share it, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Everyone have a healthy, happy day.